Another ceasefire came into effect in eastern Ukraine this week, but it's already looking fragile. Russia's decision to recognize passports issued by separatist authorities has outraged the Ukrainian governments. Moscow says the decision is for humanitarian reasons, so civilians from rebel-held areas can move more freely. But Kiev says it signifies Russia's withdrawal from the Minsk peace agreement signed 2 years ago. At least 30 people have been killed this month during fighting between pro-Russian separatists and Ukrainian government forces. I'm joined now from New York by the Secretary General of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, Mr. Lamberto Zannier. Thanks so much for joining us, sir. Now, let's talk Ukraine, because you're everybody's eyes and ears in Ukraine. In the first week of February, there were more than 10,000 ceasefire violations a day. With that in mind, are the Minsk agreements dead?
No, I would not say that the Minsk agreements are dead, but certainly that was a serious complication on the ground. There was an acute phase. In a week, we had 40,000 violations, and to give you an idea, we're 300,000 the whole year in 2016. So there was a very significant flare-up that created lots of problems also to the civilian population.
Yeah, almost 10,000 people have died in the conflict so far. Now, recent news that the Russian separatists the pro-Russian separatists are issuing identity documents for those in the east recognized by Moscow. It seems as if they're thumbing their noses at you guys and the people that are looking for a resolution to the conflict. Does it feel that way?
Well, it's been complicated all along. They have established structure since the beginning. They have people who call themselves foreign minister and whatever. They're setting up courts and police. Obviously, we don't recognize any of that. And the fact that now the Russians recognize some of the documents they issue implies also a recognition of the authorities themselves. This is certainly a complicating factor at the political process. And it will be tougher for the Ukrainians now to move forward on the implementation of Minsk in this situation. Moscow will, at some point, would have to go back on his step. They are telling us that this is a temporary measure, but still we will have to see, and we will have to see the implication on the process. There is now an agreed ceasefire. I'm in contact now with our monitors, and they're telling me that there are still some residual violations of the ceasefire, but a very limited number. So we hope that a new phase may begin. We will need now to see the next steps. Most important will be withdrawal of heavy weapons and then disengagement on the front lines.
Mm-hmm. That's encouraging. Now, there was a feeling that with Donald Trump becoming the US president, that would somehow give Russia complete license to do whatever it wants to in Ukraine, and the Minsk agreements would fall apart. But then we saw his ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, quite hard on Russia. And now the Vice President Pence, when speaking with European leaders in Brussels, committing to the Minsk agreement, urging both sides to keep the peace treaty, talking about supporting NATO and other international institutions. Is that music to your ears?
Well, I think it is important in a way to have a plan that engages the whole international community as such. We need coherence in these processes. At this moment, the Minsk agreements are the best game in town, so we need everybody to focus on that and to engage to move it forward. What I heard from the Americans at the Munich conference is an indication that this is still the plan as far as the United States are concerned. So in a way, yes, it's a positive element, because I see everybody on board on the same plan. So that to me is important because that is the basis also for our engagement on the ground.
And stepping away from the Donbass for a moment and looking at the issue of Crimea, is that on the table at all in discussions and negotiations? And what about those who would ask, is there ever the likelihood in the immediate future of Crimea ever going back to Ukraine?
Well, the issue is very much on the table. As you know, there are sanctions on Crimea, apart from the Donbass side of things. So it is not a concluded, a closed matter, but there isn't a process of negotiation about it. Crimea is a very divisive issue. The Russians are openly saying that there is nothing to discuss when it comes to Crimea. And most of the others are saying, well, this is not accepted, not acceptable, and there's nothing to negotiate. It has to be returned to Ukraine. So it is an issue that is very difficult, but there isn't at this moment a process around it.
Yeah, so you say it's very difficult. You say there isn't a process. Last May, we spoke in Istanbul. I asked you, is the OSCE suffering from a crisis of relevance? You're saying you want to have a process, you want to have them discuss something like Crimea, but you can't. So I ask you again, do you still believe that the OSCE is not suffering from a crisis of relevance? Because I asked you that and you said, no, 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 there's still a lot that you can do.
No, I don't think this has anything to do with the relevance of the OSCE. The OSCE is a place where exchanges on Crimea are in fact occurring. The issue is that there is no intention and no interest on any side to open up a negotiation around it. What we've seen over the last few years in particular is increasing divisions, and increasing divisions in an environment that is becoming more challenging and more dangerous. So we need tools to address these challenges and a place to discuss it. The OSCE is one of those places.
I want to broaden this out a little bit and look at the entire continent. Let's look at, say, the rise of the far right on the European continent. You have elections coming up where far-right groups are doing well amongst many populations in many countries on the continent. You still have an ongoing migration crisis. Tell me, what's your biggest fear? Do you fear that European unity might be torn apart?
Well, of course. If we see more populism, it will be more difficult to find a space to develop cooperative solutions in the presence of mounting nationalism. So one of the problems that we face is to try to develop a plan to address the increasingly large number of issues and of difficult issues that we have on the agenda, and communicate this strategy to our people. The problem we have is that countries are divided, and it is increasingly difficult to find common ground and to develop common solutions. The migration crisis is an example of that, and we see countries positioning themselves differently on these issues, and some even pushing back on the very notion of solidarity in addressing these challenges. That is divisive and potentially disruptive.
Final question for you, Secretary General Zannier. How is the OSCE making the world a better place?
You know, the OSCE is more than anything, is a space, and a space governed by principles and rules and commitments that the countries that are members of it have adhered to. Now, there is a crisis in the OSCE because there is a crisis around some of these principles. Some have been violated, and there is also justification for their violation. I think we need to make a stronger effort to encourage dialogue. As was mentioned in the case of Crimea, there are lots of statements around issues. There isn't enough discussion. And I'm not saying about Crimea itself or about other issues themselves, but try to understand why certain things have occurred. And understanding each other better is the beginning of a road towards finding solutions to the problems. So that open dialogue, which we had even in difficult moments during the Cold War, is something we need to return to in the future.
Lamberto Zannier, the Secretary General of the OSCE, thank you very much for joining us, sir.